Okay, good evening, everybody. So you know who I am, Harvey Meyer. So first I want to thank Frank.
For the video, they want me to introduce you over here.
Oh, all right, we're going to do it again.
We'll do it again. This is Harvey Meyer, who's a great turner that we're lucky to have, and we're going to see great things coming out of it tonight. So have fun, Harvey.
Thank you, Frank. So good evening, everyone. Just want to thank Frank for inviting me, and thank Frank and Jan for hosting me, feeding me so well, and taking good care of me while I'm here. This is my second visit to Sarasota to demonstrate for the club. I was here about 3 years ago, also in November. So a little bit about me. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, but as you could tell from my accent, I'm not from Atlanta. So I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. Any of my former neighbors here? Okay, good to see you. So I grew up in Brooklyn, and I lived there until I was around 28. And then I moved to New Jersey, exit 10. So those of you who know what that means, you'll get it. The rest of you just don't understand. But I originally lived at exit 11, then 10, then 9. And then I kept going south and ended up in Atlanta in 1994. So I've been in Atlanta for 23 years. Retired from a 43-year career in the telecom world. It was a good ride, but it just got to the point where my company was getting bought out, and I just decided that that was enough at 43 years, so I retired just about almost 5 years ago. I've been a wood turner since 2000. I've been a woodworker my whole life, but I started turning in 2000, and as soon as I started turning, I just gave up woodworking. So I've got a shop full of stuff that never gets used anymore. If it doesn't feed the lathe in some manner, then it's just a table to me now. So over the years, I've turned everything. I particularly like turning hollow vessels, but I am a fairly versatile turner. I can turn everything, although I'll admit I'm not the best spindle turner around, but I can get by. When I retired, then I became a full-time turner, and then I was turning every day of the week, and every week I'm bringing 12, 15 finished pieces, mostly hollow vessels, out of the shop into the house. And my wife said, stop this. There's nowhere to put anything else anymore. We have no horizontal surface left, so find some place to put these things or box them up, do something, just stop it. So I had tinkered a little bit with this basket illusion thing while I was still working for a living. And I realized that this was a really, really time-consuming endeavor. So I sort of put it on the back burner then. But then, when I got the order to stop producing so many things, I decided to revisit the basket illusion. And the intent for me was to slow myself down. Instead of coming up with 40, 50 pieces every month, this really cut me down to about 2 pieces a month. And that's pretty much my output, 20 to 25 pieces a year. Now that I'm traveling a lot, teaching and demonstrating, some months my output is 0. And maybe I can make up for it in another month and get 3 pieces. So I'm pretty well known now for doing basket illusion work. And for the last close to 5 years, that is all I do. I seldom turn anything other than basket illusion work. But that's okay, because I really like doing it, and I have a lot of fun with it, and I still keep trying to push myself to do it better and better and come up with more and more challenging patterns and so forth. So it's all good. So I'm going to give you a little history of the basket illusion. So anyone who's been in the wood turning world for any amount of time would have probably heard of David Nitin. David was from Boulder, Colorado, and he was very, very well known for his basket illusion work. And many people considered him the father of basket illusion. But he was not the inventor of it. The inventor, the first person that ever did it, was a gentleman named Lincoln Seitzman. Lincoln Seitzman was in the Philadelphia area, so you might have known him, Vic. He lived in Philly and also in the New Jersey Shore, or I think Long Branch, or somewhere in, I want to say Long Branch or West Long Branch, New Jersey. And he also spent some time in Fort Lauderdale every year too, I think. But he was the very first person that attempted to take a single solid piece of wood and make it look like it was a woven basket. And he did it very, very well. He's still alive. He's in his 90s, but he doesn't have anything to do with any kind of woodworking, wood turning anymore, so he's pretty much retired from it. But some of his pieces are in certain museums around the country, and a few pieces are in the AAW's permanent collection. Then along came David Nitin, and David Nitin now in more modern times, having the internet on his side, as well as the AAW and publications and so forth, and an expanding world of wood turners. David became very, very well known for doing the basket illusion work, and his work was absolutely fabulous. He's quite an artist and quite a gifted turner. But David left this world too soon, passed away about a little over 3 years ago, I believe it was, maybe 4. So those were the two most well-known people that did basket illusion work. Another fellow that I learned of, that I'm a big fan of his work, his name is Jim Atkins. Jim is in his 80s. He lives in Troy, Missouri, and he does basket illusion work that, in my opinion, is absolutely fabulous and so realistic looking that you would never realize that you weren't looking at a real basket. He concentrates only on true Native American basketry, and he replicates patterns that he sees on actual Native American baskets. He does it really, really well. But I've spoken to him a number of times. We've swapped tips over the phone. I've never had the opportunity to meet him, and I hope someday that I will get to see him. Other than that, there's me, and then there are a handful of other people that do basket illusion work from time to time. Some people can get kind of productive at it for a while, and then they get bored with it, so they go do something else, and then they might come back to it. So there's not that many people doing it that I know of, but I know there are a lot of people doing it. They just don't seem to publicize their work and put it out on the internet. But I know, and I have run into a lot of people that do it. As I go from club to club, I see people bringing pieces in to show and tell, so I know there are a lot of people doing it, but they do it silently. And I don't know why they're like that. I think if you're doing this kind of work, you should be proud of it, and you should let everybody know that you're doing it, because it's very, very unusual. So a little bit about the process now. I generally start out by turning the piece first, and then once I know the size of the piece and how many beads I come up with, I will then design the pattern to fit the piece. You could also design a pattern first and then turn the piece to fit the pattern. That's fine too. I just found, for me, it seems easier to turn the piece first and then go on and design a pattern. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about designing the patterns and how I do that, and then we'll get on to doing the turning and showing you the whole process. I have a handout here with me, so you can all take one of these. I hope there's enough to go around. There should be. It's a two-sided handout. On one side is all of the specialty items that you need to do basket illusion: beading tools, burning pens, India ink markers, and so forth. So there's a whole list of the things I use and where you can get them. Most of these items I generally carry with me, and I sell them. So if there's anybody that's interested, and if we have any time when we're done, if you could see me, if you're anything that you want, just see me. I probably have most of this stuff with me. If you're taking the class at Frank's for the next 2 days, then don't worry about it tonight. I have stuff put aside at Frank's place. On the other side of the handout is a 17-step, a short process on how to do the basket illusion. It's just a highlighted process. So I'll pass these around. I wrote an article last year for the AAW American Woodturner. And this was in the October 2016 issue. So if you are an AAW member, oh, it's over there. I'm showing it to the audience. See? This was the October 2016. So if you're an AAW member and you have this, there's a 9-page article that I wrote in here. And let me open it to that. And here it is, called the Basket Illusion Demystified. And so basically everything that you're going to see tonight is written in this article. So this is a good reference if you wanted to remember something that you saw tonight that may be a little hazy or something. You could read through it in the article here. If you don't have this issue and you're a member of the AAW, you can get it online. You can download the entire issue or download the article, and then you could just print out a copy for yourself. So the entire process starts out with, can you turn the camera down on here, or I'll, can you get it right onto the lathe bed here? Is that possible? Okay, I could move to you if you, there we go. Okay, so the whole process starts out once I've turned the piece and I know what the size of the piece is, then I decide how many segments I'm going to divide the piece up into, and then I print out this what's called polar graph paper. And on the handout that you'll be receiving, there's the first item on there is a program that you can download for free. It's called Graph Paper Maker. You can download that off the web for free and install it on your computer. Excuse me. And then you can tell the program how many spokes you want and how many concentric circles you want. And then starting with this and some colored pencils, you can design a pattern that you want to then put on your piece. So it would look like something like this. Here's one that I just sort of sketched out in a pencil. And then you can print it out in various sizes. So this one has 72 spokes, 30 concentric circles. Here's one that has 96 segments, 40 concentric circles. And so basically you just tell the program how many spokes, how many circles, and off you go. Here's one that has 120 spokes, 43 circles. So just some examples. Here's 144. Once you've got the paper, what I would normally do is I would print out roughly 8 or 10 sheets of it. So when it generates it, it sends a PDF to your computer. So then you could save the PDF, and then if you ever want to use that same graph paper again, you don't even have to open the program. You could just print that PDF over and over again. So once I print that out, then I would take some colored pencils or markers, whatever, and then I would just sort of start sketching out a pattern to get the spacing and all the repetitions correct. So this particular pattern, I only drew half of it here, but it repeats every 12 segments. So since this one has 96, it would repeat 8 times. And then I work it out for however many beads I was able to get on my platter. So in this particular case, it requires 31 beads to do it exactly as you see it here. But if I only had 30 beads, well, I could work with that. I would just leave one space less at the top, or I would subtract one space less in here, or maybe one space less at the bottom. If I had more beads, then I might increase the height of this, just add 1 or 2 more to each one of these vertical legs. So I can always adjust the pattern to fit whatever I have on the wood. So this is just some examples of some ones that I've sketched out. And then I'll show you the way I actually do it now. I don't sketch these out by hand anymore. But these are just some of the ones that I usually give my students when I teach at Campbell or Aramont. So just a couple of variations here. Okay, this is one that Ron did. You could see it on the show and tell table up at the front. Okay, so then I graduated about a year ago to using software now to design the program, to design the pattern. I was trying to find a way to speed up the process and not have to, every time you make a mistake on paper, you have to either erase it or you got to crumple up the paper, throw it away, and start over again. So I kept looking for software that would let me design this on the computer in a much, much easier way. So I experimented with Adobe Illustrator, and that will do the job, but you have to pay them $20 a month for the rest of your life to use the software. So I found a free software program called Inkscape that is very similar to Adobe Illustrator. It's used by people in graphic design world, web designers. Inkscape, I-N-K-Scape, S-C-A-P-E. It's a very, very complicated program to use. I only understand about 1/4% of what it can do, but I have figured out how to do this on a computer. So the beauty of this is you color in your squares just by clicking on them. And you select a paint bucket tool and you select the color, and then you just click inside the little boxes, and that colors the square. And if you want, you could just drag down a whole row and color a whole bunch at one time. And if you use a pen tablet instead of a mouse, it's even faster and even better. And that's the way I do it. The other thing is if you make a mistake and you color in a box you didn't want to color in, or you want to change your spacing or something, you can just hit the delete key and it goes away. And then to further make it better, once you draw out a couple of segments of it, then you can copy and paste and rotate it, copy, paste, rotate it, and you can have this entire thing filled out for you in just a few seconds. So this has cut my design time down a tremendous amount. So I do all my designs using this software program now. But again, it's very complicated software. And if you're not a graphic designer, and I'm not, I don't even know what half the words in there mean. There are tools and things that graphic designers use, and I don't have a clue what they are. So here's just a few other examples of some ones that I've done using the software. And this is the one we're sort of going to work on today. So we're going to keep this one on the side here. Actually, this is the one we're going to do because it's a 7-inch platter. This is a hand-drawn one, and this is the same thing used on the computer. And you can see you can get pretty complicated with it. This pattern here is one of the ones on the table here. Here's another one. This was a very large 16-inch basket that I did. So that's just some examples of what you could do with Inkscape. And it does make it a lot easier, but there's a very steep learning curve in learning to use it. You can also use either the Graph Paper Maker software or Inkscape to print your own index wheels, because there's no commercial indexing system in the world that is going to satisfy you doing basket illusion work, because you are not always going to index to one of those numbers that happens to be on the index wheel. So if you have an index wheel that goes up to 120, what if you want to index something to 132 or 204 or 192 or an odd number like 195? There's no indexing system in the world that's going to support that. So with the software programs, you can print out any index wheels you want, and we'll talk about this more when I get to the indexing part of the demo. But I print out all of my own. Here you see there's one that's good for 160. Here's one that's 180. This one I could use it for 144 or 288. Here's a 200 or 100. Here's another 180. Okay, so you get the drift. So using that software, you can print your own index wheels. Then you just cut it out. You tape it or glue it onto an 8-inch piece of masonite disc or a piece of plexiglass or anything round and stiff. Cut a hole in the middle to fit your spindle, and you have your index wheel. Free. Free is always the best price on anything. So the other thing I'll point out, whenever I do platters, I use polar graph paper like I showed you. This particular polar graph, I'll put it back down here. So I use polar graph paper anytime I'm designing a pattern for a platter. Whenever I'm going to design a pattern for a vessel, I just use grid-style graph paper. And you can print grid-style graph paper with the Graph Paper Maker, or you can do it on the computer using Inkscape. Okay, so either way, you can get grid-style paper. And you tell the software how big you want the squares to be, how tall, how wide, how many per inch, and so forth. So it's very, very handy for using regular type of grid-style paper. So this is just another example of ones that I've done with the Graph Paper Maker. On the table with some of my finished pieces, there's a photo album. And in the photo album, behind each picture, mostly every picture, there's a copy of the pattern that I used. So if you feel so inclined to look through the photo album, if you pull out the paper behind, you can see some of the patterns that I did to design those particular pieces. So feel free to do that. Okay. So some of you that know me or have seen me before, you know that I tell stupid jokes while I demonstrate. These are one-liners designed to make you groan and grimace. So I just throw them out there at random as I'm going along. Now, being that I'm getting on in my years, I can't remember any of them. So I do have them all printed out here on paper behind me. So there's your first joke. So generally, whenever I turn around to get a tool, I'm also reading up on the next joke that I'm going to tell you. But anyway, so as I'm getting ready to get started here, I always like to tell my favorite story about when I lived in New York City. So I worked in the phone company in New York, so I worked all around the city, mostly in Manhattan, but I worked all around New York City. But one of my favorite stories was once when some thieves broke into one of the New York City Police Department, one of their precincts, and these guys broke in the middle of the night and stole all the toilets in the building, and the cops had nothing to go on. So that's your first one, okay? There will be more. All right, so whenever I do platters, I generally use hard maple. I use hard maple for a couple of reasons. One is it's a very hard, dense wood. It takes the beads really, really well. And then the second reason is that it's white. So it's a good white, light-colored wood. It's closed grain, hard, and dense. So that makes it perfect for doing the basket illusion. There are other woods that work, but to me, hard maple has been the best. I have done pieces out of sycamore, alder. You could use ash, even oak, but I just don't like oak. I wouldn't use cherry because cherry is going to darken over time, so you're going to lose the contrast between the light wood and your ink. So I would stay away from cherry for this. For most of my vessels, I use Bradford Pear. So any of you that are familiar with Bradford Pear trees, they planted those all over Atlanta and most of the southeast. They're fast-growing landscape trees. They grow with very large canopies. They usually split out into multiple trunks. Their root system can't support the canopy up there, so whenever the wind blows, there's Bradford Pear on the ground. So it's readily available in Atlanta for me, generally free. And as I said before, free is the best price for everything. So I like it because it's a very hard, heavy, dense wood. It has no real grain characteristics. It's bland, so it's perfect for doing this kind of work. The only exception to that is there's two of the vessels there where I actually did basket illusion on both the outside and the inside. So those are done out of hard maple. Because I need to use kiln-dry wood to do that. When I turn Bradford Pear, I'm turning green wood, roughing it out, letting it dry, praying that it doesn't crack, and then once it's dry, I return it a second time and then do the beading and do the basket illusion work on it. So we always start, we're doing a platter today, so this kind of work normally takes a long time. You're looking at some pieces there that have 150 hours invested in them. So I obviously can't do a piece like that. Even if I did a little small 6-inch platter, something like this, this would take me probably 20 to 25 hours to do at home, because remember we do both sides, so it has the woven effect. But what we're going to do today is a small little piece like this. I'm not going to be able to complete any of the steps except for the turning part, but you will be able to see how I do everything. So we'll do a little bit of all of the steps. After I turn it, we'll do some indexing, we'll do some burning, we'll do some dyeing, we'll do a little bit of burning this herringbone weave around the rim here. So all of the steps you'll get to see today. So these are just a couple examples. These three here are all the same pattern, just they have differently spaced burn lines on them to give them 3 different effects. And then this is basically what we're going to do today is something very similar to this piece here. This is a very easy pattern to do, so I can go through it rather quickly. Any pattern that has consecutive boxes where you're coloring consecutive boxes all at once, either horizontally or vertically, goes fast because you don't have to be too careful with the ink, except where you're right at the very edge of the burn lines. But when you're doing pieces that have one individual square burn here and there, those take a lot longer because you got to be very careful on all the corners of the square to keep the ink contained within the square and not to go outside the lines. So what we're going to work on today is on a 7-inch piece of hard maple. And the first thing I'm going to do to it is I'm going to put a little internal tenon in here. And this is actually going to be the top of the piece. So I'm just putting this tenon in here so that I have a way of holding it so that I could work on the back of the piece first. Okay, then once I get the back of the piece in there, then I'm going to put a tenon on the back, shape it, put the beads on it, turn it around, and then work on the front of the piece, and then this tenon will disappear. So this is just a temporary holding method, but I don't want to waste any of my 5/4 thickness here. So I made that tenon on the inside, okay, and this way I still have all of the thickness here that I started out with. Okay, so that's how we're going to start. So I'm just going to take a piece of mouse pad, and I have the center marked on here, and I'm going to put the mouse pad between my chuck and the wood, and I'm going to bring this live center right into my center mark. And then that's going to hold it in there. And as long as everything is tight, this is not going to come out of there. It's in there. It's perfectly safe. There are other ways you can start this. You can start this with a screw center, with a worm screw that comes with your chuck, but you just can't go more than, say, 3 threads deep, so you'd have to have a couple of spacers on there to take up the length of the screw, because if you go too deep, then you're going to have a hole in the middle of your finished piece. Because remember, we only have 5/4 thickness here. So I'm going to go in there with a parting tool, and I'm just going to part myself in and make that internal tenon. Worried about safety, when I turn at home, I wear a face shield religiously. Whether I'm turning a 100-pound piece of Bradford Pear into one of those, or I'm turning the tiniest little piece of ebony into a little icicle or finial for an ornament, I wear my face shield all the time, and I also wear safety eyeglasses underneath my face shield. When I demonstrate, I don't like having the shield in front of me. It's like having a wall between us. So I wear goggles over my safety glasses. So I hope all of you protect your eyes when you're turning. If you don't protect your eyes, then your first project should be your white cane, because you'll probably need it someday. Also, protect your lungs. You only get one shot at those. You can get your knees replaced, you can get your shoulders, your hips replaced, you can get all kinds of organs replaced, but you can't get your lungs replaced. So protect those. Wear respirators, wear breathing masks, control your dust, and protect your teeth, because implants are expensive. So keep that face shield on and wear it. So I'm going to keep my goggles on. And I'm also going to wear a glove on my left hand, because shavings that come off hard maple are hot. So I keep a glove on my left hand for that. Be very careful when you wear gloves at the lathe. Don't touch your wood with gloves on. All right, Frank. It's this thing here, I think. Yeah, it's this thing. It doesn't make the noise when that's on. When I take that off, it doesn't make noise. It doesn't make the noise. What'd you do? Oh, they got the door open here. Yeah, see? It's only when that's on. It's something rattling in there.
Okay, we'll leave it off.
Okay?
I could tighten it.
Okay, when you're ready. Well, stop.
Leave it off. Just don't drop anything in the way.
I'll try to shoot the shaving somewhere else. Okay, so I'm just going to come in now. With the way I use the parting tool, the tailstock's always in the way. So what I have to do is I have to raise the parting tool up a little higher than I would normally use it. But to keep the parting tool on center, I raise my tool rest up a little bit so that I'm cutting on center. So I just come in with the parting tool, and I just go in there, and I cut my tenon to fit my chuck. And I know this chuck, I can go down to about 1/7/8. And the tenon doesn't have to be very deep. I'm only maybe an 1/8 inch total depth. That's fine. this is just clearance for the width of the jaws. And that's ready to go. Now I'm used to Palmatic lathes, and Frank says that's a shame, but I like mustard color rather than mayonnaise color. This lathe is made in Canada, eh? Yeah. Eh? So you know Michael Hasselhoek from Canada, so every time I see Michael somewhere when we're out demonstrating someplace, the first thing I always go is, eh? And he says, we don't say that, we don't say that. All right, so I'm in my chuck. Okay, this piece is just sawed round, so it's really not round yet. But the first thing I'm always going to do is mark the center with the tailstock. So if you don't do that, you pay the price later. So always do that first. Get a divot in there so you have the center mark. So later on, when you have to reverse it, you know where your center is. Okay, so the first thing I'm just going to do is true up the circumference of the piece so that it runs round. I'm just going to use that on I'm going to do that with the bowl gouge. All right, how do you get this thing to go the other way? There you go. Where's the speed thing here? Now, I'm not supposed to touch the big red button if I remember, right? Okay, that's round. So does anybody know what's the best method of birth control for seniors? Nudity, right. My son recently took his driver's test. He got 8 out of 10, right? And the other 2 jumped out of the way. All right, so I'm going to put a 10 in here, and then I'm going to shape what's going to be the back of the piece. All right, so I'm just going to make a mark approximately where my tenon is going to be. That's about right. Okay, so the rest of this has to get wasted away. So the fastest way I like to waste wood away is just to peel it away. Now, there's several ways I could do that. I can keep going like this and removing wood. I can go this way, remove wood, but the way I like to do it is just to come face into the wood and just peel it off. It's the fastest way of getting rid of wood quickly. Leaves a terrible surface. But the beauty of it is the tool never sees end grain. If I'm going like this, my tool sees end grain twice every revolution. If I want to go this way, my tool's going to see end grain twice every revolution. But if I'm going face into the wood, my tool always sees side grain. Just easier way. Okay, then I'm going to leave a shoulder for my tenon right there. And then I'm going to prepare the tenon. So tenon my chuck needs to have a slight dovetail on it. So I like to use a detailed gouge for that, because that lets me get right into the corner. It's got a nice point on the gouge. So what I'm doing is making sure I have a sharp corner in there, and that this surface here is flat, because that's what's going to, the face of the chuck jaws are going to seat on that surface there. And the tenon itself just needs a very slight dovetail. Depth-wise, I have about, say, 3/16 of an inch. That's more than sufficient. And now I'm going to shape what's going to be the back of the piece. Okay, and I was starting to develop my convex shape. Now I'm just going to refine it a bit and then work on my surface quality. So I'm just looking over here. I'm not worried about what my tool's doing. I'm focusing over here to watch the contour of the piece. Now what I'm shooting for here is the best possible surface quality I can get off the gouge, because I do not sand this before I do the beading. There's no sanding at all in the basket illusion work. Sandpaper does not exist for basket illusion. So what I like to do is take a freshly sharpened gouge and I save that just for this final tweaking cut. And the reason we don't sand is because sometimes when you sand, abrasive particles from the sandpaper can break off and embed themselves in the pores of the wood. Now, hard maple, that's not likely to happen, but other woods, it is likely to happen, especially if you're doing open pore wood like ash and oak. So if any of the abrasive particles get embedded in the surface of the wood, then as soon as I touch it with my nice sharp beading tool, my beading tool is as dull as a doornail. I'll turn one bead and I'll have a dull beading tool. So what this has forced me to do is it has forced me to become a better turner. It's made me learn how to get a better surface quality off my tools so that I can go right in there with the beading tool and go to work and no sanding necessary. Now, if you do have to sand, then what you would do is you would make sure you have compressed air, and then you would carefully blow out all of the pores of the wood to get any abrasive particles in there. A better way of sanding, if you have to, is to use abranet. It's that screening type of material. So this way you can fix up your surface without using an abrasive. It's more of like a screen. And abranet, you can get it from 80, the equivalent of 80 grit all the way to like 600. So that would make a much better method of sanding if you have to do it. But it's better to learn to use your tools to get the surface quality that you need without sanding. So here you see I've got a pretty good surface quality. I may have tool marks in it, but that's fine, I don't care. The only part of this surface that's going to remain is the very top of each bead. Because as I run the beading tool on here, I'm cutting into the surface. And it's only the very, very top apogee of each bead which will be part of this surface here. So I don't want any tear out or any chips or anything missing in here, because if that ends up in that very top surface of the bead, then I have a bead that just doesn't look good. And if your beads are not cut well and round and smooth, then the marking pens that you're going to use later on are going to wear out very, very quickly on you. So good beads gives you long life of your marking pens. Bad, abrasive, rough beads, you'll get very short life out of your marking pens. So again, learning to use your tools properly is the best way to do this. So now we're going to get ready for beading. And I use 2 beading tools to do the job. I'll put them here so you can see them. These are made by D-Way, D-Way. It's Dave Schweitzer. He's out in Shelton, Washington. And he makes these tools in 6 different sizes, from 1/16 all the way to 3/8. And I only use, for basket illusion, I use the 1/8 beading tool, this one here, for 99.9% of what I do. And then I use the 3/16 tool just for the very outer bead, and that's it. You can, if you're doing larger pieces, just use the 3/16 tool from all the way top to bottom. Do all your beads in 3/16. That's fine, that's acceptable. David Nitin, most of his work was done all with 3/16 beads. I prefer 1/8 beads. Well, if you look at all of my pieces here on the tables, they're all done with 1/8 inch beads. It makes the beads smaller, it gives you more beads per inch, gives you more flexibility in designing your patterns because you have more beads, more squares to work with. But the downside is it adds more burning time and it adds more coloring time, because the more squares you have to color in, the more squares you have to burn, the more time you have to spend. But I like the effect of that better, so I like 1/8 inch beads. But it's perfectly acceptable to do your piece with 3/16 inch beads. The thing is, whichever tool you use, the 1/8 or the 3/16, you need to have the right burning pen to burn the lines over each bead after you do the indexing. So the person who makes burning pens for me is Optima. He's out in Minnesota. He only makes these special burning tips for basket illusion. He makes them in 1/8 and 3/16. And what I did is I turned wood and beaded it for him so that he made the beading tool, he made the burning pen fit exactly over the beads that are left by D-Way's beading tools. So if you're making your beads with some other beading tool and you buy these pens from Optima, they may not fit your beads correctly. If you're using the D-Way beading tool and you buy these pens from Optima, you're in business. So worried about these tools. They're made out of M42 cobalt steel, so they stay long and incredibly short. They stay sharp an incredibly long amount of time. I use them unhandled, just the way you see them. A handle is not necessary and will probably get in your way if you have a smaller lathe. You need to use the tool on the tool rest with the flute on the tool rest down, and with the handle part of the tool would be way down here. So you're using the tool in a shearing position. If you use the tool like this, where you're holding it up high, it's more of a scraping tool. Down like this, it shears the wood, and you'll see the shavings that come off as I do this. You can actually see how it's actually cutting the wood. It's not scraping. Now, if you have those beading tools from Sorby or those other Chinese versions of them, those are scrapers. They will not give you beads the way these tools will. The important thing about using the tool is that the position that you use it in, where the flute is down on the tool rest and the handle's down low like this, is these points have got to be dead center. And right now, I'm about 1/4 of an inch above center. I don't know if you could see that. Yeah, I think you can. So I'm above center, which means I've got to drop the tool rest so that the position that the tool is in when I use it, now the point goes right into the center. Why? And here's why. If I'm above center, as you're trying to cut the bead, it has a tendency to try to push itself back at you. It doesn't want to stay in the track. If you're below center, it scrapes. If you're on center, it is as sweet can be. So you have to position your tool rest so that whatever distance it's going to be from the wood, here I'm very close to the wood, and I have the tool in position I'm going to use it, I'm on center. Now when I move the tool rest over here to work, I've got to keep the tool rest the same distance from the wood, so all that geometry stays the same. So I have to move the tool rest all the way over to here and keep it as close to the wood as I possibly can. I like using robust tool rests for this. Okay, that hardened drill rod on the top lets you get the tool very, very close to the wood, and there's no overhang, therefore no need for a handle. And because the hardened drill rod is harder than this, or hard as the steel, the tool, the flutes of the tool, the sharp edges here, do not tend to bite into the top of the drill rod. If you have those tool rests that come with those smaller jet mini lathes or the Delta mini lathes, Those are softer cast iron, and as you're using the tool, the sharp corners of the flute tend to bite themselves in to the softer cast iron, and that inhibits you from using the tool correctly. When you use the tool on center in the position that you're in, what you're going to do is you don't just plunge the tool in and let it scrape. You're going to wiggle the tool from side to side so that you cut with the left point, then the right point. Left point, right point. The shavings will come off one side of the tool, then the shavings come off the other side, and then the shavings will come off one side and the other side. And when the bead becomes perfectly round in front of your face, that's when you need to stop. If you continue on the bead after it's gone round, then you start scraping the top of the bead, and you can get tear out or chips in it. So whenever I teach, I have my students color in some of the wood with a pencil so that you could see how the beading tool is behaving. I'll just do a small section here. You can color it in, you can paint it, because all of that will disappear. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to score with just the very points of the tool. I'm just going to score lines so that I can have the beads perfectly positioned so they will all be adjacent next to each other with a sharp V between them. So I'm just going to do that first, and I'm going to start not right on the very end of the piece. I'm going to come in about a 1/16 of an inch or so. So I'm leaving about a 1/16 of an inch of extra waste wood over here, and I'll explain that later on when we get to the other side. Then I'll score with the 1/8 tool. I'll put the left point in that line that I made, swing it over, and score the right line. And I put the left point in, score the right line. I put the left point in, score the right one. And just keep doing that. And by doing it this way, you are sure that every bead is going to be exactly spaced perfectly. If you just start cutting the beads and then try to figure out where to put this left point next to a bead that's already rounded, you never know exactly where to put it. And then you wind up with the valleys sometimes too wide or sometimes too narrow where the beads actually hit each other. So by doing this, you're assuring that the spacing is perfect every single time. Okay, so I'll go that far because I'm running out of tool rest. So now I'll come back with the 3/16 tool, and I'm going to do this in slow motion so you can actually watch the pencil disappearing. Okay, so first I'm going to put the tool right in the score marks. Now I swing it to the left, and you see shavings come off the left. I'll blow them away. Shavings come off the right. Now shavings come off the left, and then they come off the right. Now they come off the left, and now they come off the right. And now you could, I don't know if you could see well, but you could see the pencil has disappeared off the sides of the beads, and there's only pencil on the very, very top. Now if I just keep going, when that pencil disappears, see now there's just a very thin line, very thin pencil line on the top. As soon as that pencil line disappears, that's it, you're done. Do not continue cutting more because you'll scrape the top of the bead. So then I'll switch to the 1/8 tool, and I'll do the same thing. You watch the pencil disappear as I go, and it's gone. So that's done. And again, so now I'm going to put the right point in that score line, not the left point. The right point goes in the score line. That's my reference point. Then I swing the tool left to right, and when that pencil line disappears, it's all gone. Okay, I'll stop the lathe just so you can see those. Okay, so I've got perfectly cut beads here. They're all perfectly adjacent to each other. There's a nice sharp V between each one of them. Okay, and each bead is 1/8 of an inch. So theoretically, I should be able to get about 8 beads to an inch. It doesn't exactly come out that way because the tool is a hair more than 1/8 of an inch, a couple thousandths more. But the bead itself is 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so now I'll continue. Now I'll do these in real time. This is how I actually do them. So you see how fast it actually is. Okay, now I have that last one that I scored that's still flat on the top. So I'm not going to cut that yet until I continue scoring because I need that last reference line to begin continue scoring. I should shut the lathe off before I move the tool rest. You know that. Okay, so now I'll continue scoring. And I can probably squeeze one more in there. There it is. Okay, now I can cut those. And the last one that I scored, I'm not going to cut that yet, because later on I'm going to remove most of this tenon and most of the shoulder, make that tenon a lot smaller, and I'm going to add more beads to the back later. Okay, but I need to have a tenon that's big enough to support the piece to work on the other side. So for now, I can only go that far. The next thing I have to do, it's dark over here, is I have to burn the valley in between each bead. So I used to do that using sandpaper. So you have to use a paper-backed, heavy paper-backed sandpaper. And I'll do one or two with that, but I don't do this anymore because it smells very, very bad. And you're burning not only wood, but you're burning the paper, you're burning the abrasive, and you're burning the binder that holds the abrasive on the paper. And breathing that in is not good for you or anybody. So I don't do this way anymore. You need speed, because this is all friction. You take the edge of the paper, you put it in your valley, and you hold it there, not like that. You just hold it in place, and you get a puff of smoke comes off, and you get a line that's burned inside the valley. But that really smells bad, as I said. So a better way is to use Formica, but Formica is too thick. Standard Formica is about 32 thousandths. So there was a guy in Arizona that did this for me the first time. He measured the thickness of the sandpaper that we were using, and it comes out about 15 thou. So he took Formica and he ran it through his drum sander, thickness sander, and got it down to about 15 thousandths. So that makes it perfect. So using that, I actually like to use the tool rest to do that. It's a little easier. You don't have to, but you can. So all you do is just take this little edge of it. It's about an inch thick, inch wide rather. It's 15 thousandths thick. And just place it in the valley. And it's that fast. And that burns a nice line. See, this is splitting on me here. Sometimes they're too thin. This one's splitting too. Okay, and that's as far as I can go. Now, sometimes as you're moving the Formica from bead to bead, sometimes you bump the top of a bead and you burn a little bit of the top of the bead, or maybe you burn a little bit of the side of the bead. So that's really not too much of a problem. You can clean that up. I used to use one of these sanding mops with the lathe off. And inadvertently, you're always going to mess up something on the top of the bead. So I used to use one of these in a drill with the lathe off and keeping it parallel with the beads, not that way, parallel with the beads. I would just run it by hand, and I would clean everything up that way. So that works. But what works even better is a piece of maroon Scotch-Brite. So you can run the lathe a little slower so that you don't melt the stuff. And then just hit the top of it and clean everything up. And this won't change the profile of the beads because it's so soft and flexible. But that will clean up any overburn or anything that you messed up that you shouldn't have done. Okay, so the back of the piece is done for now. So we're going to take it out of the chuck and turn it around. So you know who I bumped into on my way to the eye doctor? Everyone. And hopefully it runs true. All right, we're in good shape here. Just make sure it's nice and tight. I had to give up eating lunch meat, so I went cold turkey. No, you don't like that one? I'll get another one for you. My wife said to stop acting like a flamingo, so I had to put my foot down. Come on, that's a good one. All right, wait a minute. This one I can never remember. So a friend of mine called up and he said, "How you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing great. I'm busy right now." He said, "Well, yeah, what are you working on?" So I said, "I'm working on the aquathermal treatment of ceramic, aluminum, and steel in a constrained environment." So he said, "Wow, I'm really impressed." I said, "Well, don't be. I'm just washing dishes while my wife is watching." All right, so now I'm going to work on the front. So if anyone who's ever turned the platter, you know what happens when you turn a platter to final thickness. Okay, as soon as you get down to your final thickness, the outer part of the platter starts to flutter and wobble, right? Because you're relieving all the stress that's inside the wood, and as you relieve the stress, even if it's kiln dry wood, it's going to start fluttering and shaking on you. So if I were to turn this down to final thickness all at once, get it down, and then it starts to wobble, now I can't cut the beads. Because if it's shaking and wobbling on me, going in and out, then I'll get a full bead on this side and only get a half a bead on that side. Or if it's really fluttering badly, I'll get a full bead over here and no bead over there. So to eliminate that, we're going to work in stages. We're going to work from the rim to the center down in stages. So we're going to start out up here, do maybe 1.5 inches down to final thickness, put the beads on, and then go down further to final thickness, put the beads on, and do it down in probably 3 stages for a piece this size. On a larger platter that's, say, 12, 13 inches, I'd go down to maybe 5 or 6 stages. Okay, each one about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. Okay, that lets me get my beading done before that section starts to move. Once I'm done up here with the beading, I don't care if it starts to flutter 1/2 inch, it doesn't bother me, because I don't have to hit it again. So the first thing I have to do before I start working on the front section is, you remember I left a 1/16 of an inch of extra wood before the 3/16 bead over here. So that means when I get this side done, I never know where to begin that 3/16 bead. Never 100% sure where the 3/16 bead should start so that it's directly sitting above that one. Now, it has to be directly above that one for a good reason, because I'm going to round over the whole rim of the piece. Here's a good example. Here's a good example. So after I have a 3/16 bead here, and I have the 3/16 bead over here, and then I'm going to round it all over so that I can burn this weave on here later on. But I want to keep the full 3/16 there, and I want to keep the full 3/16 over here. And if I don't place the bead in the front exactly where it should be, I'm not going to wind up that way. I'll wind up with 3/16 on the back or the front, but not on both. So in order to make it less guesswork, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the rim of the piece so that it's at a right angle to the contour of the back. And to do that, I just use a little square, and I put it right along the back of the piece, right about over here in this section, and I slide it down to see how much I'm off. And I'm off about 20 degrees here. So I'm going to shape this rim of the piece a little bit here before I work on the front, just so that I have a square corner between here and the rim. Okay, so here we go. And then we'll take a look and see if we got there. Here we go. And bingo, I got it right on the first try. So now I'm square between here and here. So now after I thin this out, now it would be real easy for me to know exactly where to begin the first 3/16 bead. And really what it means is however much extra wood I left here, that 1/16 of an inch, it's going to be the same amount on the other side. You'll see how that works out as we do it. Okay, so here we go. So I'm going to thin this out. Now, finished thickness is about 1/4 inch. And I like 1/4 inch because this is heavy, dense wood we're working with. And if you leave it too thick, somebody picks it up, it's heavy. If you picked up a basket, it's not heavy, it's lightweight. So to make it believable, I like it to be lightweight. And so in order to be lightweight, I got to turn it down to about 1/4 inch thick. Now in a demo, you should never show off, because if things can go wrong, they always go wrong during the demo. But I'm going to shoot for my 1/4 inch anyway, because I never learn. My IQ came back negative, by the way. Whew, good thing. I was worried about that. Okay, so now that I've gotten rid of wood, now I'm going to come in and very light bevel ride. I'm going to make a better surface here. And then I'm going to test my wall thickness to make sure I'm even. So whatever I have here, I need to have over here as well. So I'm measuring basically off the top of the bead, and I drag the calipers down, and here I'm touching the wood, and here I have a little gap, so I know I'm a little bit thicker over there than I am here. Now, why does that matter? Because if I'm 1/4 inch thick here, and I'm 5/16 of an inch thick here, then the next one I'm going to be 3/8 of an inch thick, and then by the time I get to the middle, I'm going to be 5/8 of an inch thick. I'm not 1/4 inch thick. The piece is going to be heavy. So I shoot for even wall thickness as I go. So this cut will pretty much even up the wall thickness. And now I'm going to make the final cut. Bevel ride, light pressure on the bevel. So a lot of people, when you say ride the bevel, you know, they rub the bevel on the wood. So it's not rubbing, riding, pressing, it's floating the bevel. It's kissing, it's caressing, okay? If somebody caresses your arm, do you want them to go like this to you, or do you want them to go like that? That's the way you should feel to the wood, okay? The wood wants you to ride the bevel, but it doesn't want to feel it. It doesn't want to know it, okay? So it's a very, very light touch. The gouge is some very relaxed hands. If you came up here, you can pull the gouge right away from me. Very, very light cut. Take your time. Let the lathe do the work. The lathe is the muscle. The tool does the work, and my job is to steer the tool in the direction that it needs to go. So that should have left me with a nice surface quality. Okay, with no tear out, no chips. Okay, so right off the tool, got fiber in the diet here. So right off the tool, I can go to work with my beading tools now. And my wall thickness is dead on even. And that's just, I'd say, pretty close to 1/4 inch, maybe a 64th more. So I'll get my beading tools ready. And then I got to get the tool rest in position so that I can get the height of the tool correct, so I'm above center. So I'm going to drop the tool rest so that the position I use the tool is going to be on center. Then I'm going to move the tool rest so that it's right up against the wood right in here. Make sure it's not hitting. Okay, now with the 3/16 tool, I'm going to get ready to score the first bead. So I have about a 1/16 of an inch of wood left on the back. I'm going to make sure I have a 1/16 of an inch of wood left on the front. Okay, and you're going to see why I need that extra 1/16 of an inch in a few seconds. So right here, I'm going to score that 3/16 bead right there. And then I'm going to score a couple of 1/8. Now I'm going to come back and cut the 3/16. Now sometimes, because the wood is getting thin, sometimes you're going to get vibration. And if you get vibration where the wood starts screaming at you, you can't cut the beads. You're going to get chips missing the beads. Guaranteed you're going to have chips in the beads. So you have to dampen the vibration. So I'm going to show you how we do that. It usually starts around the 3rd or the 4th bead. So let's see if that's true. So far, so good. starting to make noise. That means I got to do something about it. So I take a wad of paper towels and I hold it behind the piece with my hand, and I use that to dampen the vibration so that I can cut the bead without the wood vibrating on me. Now that I've got that 3/16 bead cut, the first thing I do is put away the 3/16 tool because I don't need it anymore. So if I accidentally pick it up and start using it when I think I'm using a 1/8 tool and I start cutting 3/16 beads, then I've messed up. So before I cut those 1/8 beads, now I've got to round over this 3/16 bead on the back to the 3/16 bead on the front. I got to marry them. Okay, so we're going to go in there and we're going to use a negative rake scraper to do that. So for a negative rake scraper, I just grind a slight relief off of the top, a couple of degrees. I don't know how many, but just a few degrees. And what's important is that the angle between this negative rake on the top and the front bevel on the front of the scraper has to be less than 90. Now, there are different ways to grind these. Some people grind them the same angle on the top as the bottom, and they meet in the middle so that you don't have to keep readjusting your platform. There are other ways to do it, but this is simple enough, and it takes a scraper and makes it a refinement tool. So now when you use it, instead of holding the handle up, you keep it parallel or level with the floor, horizontal, and it's just for refining. It's no longer a tool that's going to hog wood out quickly. But it is literally catch-proof, and it takes off the nice, wispy little shavings. And my goal here now is to round off that bead onto that bead by getting rid of this waste wood. And having that extra 1/16 of an inch wood lets me get the crown of the beads so that the whole thing becomes rounded over on the top. So here we go. Coming around this side. There we are. And there we are. Trying to get the crown right in the center if I can. So I have my 3/16 bead there. Now you see, I could be a blonde if I want to right now. Would I look good that way? So I've got my 3/16 bead front and back, okay, and I've crowned it over so everything's nice and round on the top. The only thing I ever do in this with a piece of sandpaper is right now, is just to blend that in, just like that. That's it. Now I can go back to work cutting these beads. So now I've got to position the tool rest height again, put it into height for beading so that my points are on center, bring it back where it belongs. And here we go. So I've got 3 of them scored, so that means I can only cut 2 of them. The third one that I scored, I have to leave that as my reference point for moving on to the next stage. So now I'm going to come in here. It's hard for me to see what I'm doing with my head over here, but I'll try. Okay, so I've got those 2 beads cut. Now in this first 1/8 bead, I got a little tiny bit of what I call frass in there. I just maybe didn't position the tool perfectly, so I use this little teardrop tool that D-Way makes, and I can go in there and carefully, just very carefully remove that little bit of frass. That's it. It would probably have burned out when I hit it with the Formica to burn the valley. It probably would have disappeared just doing that. Okay, so now we're going to thin it down for the next part of it, down to 1/4 of an inch. Alrighty, here we go. Now we'll test the wall thickness to see how even Steven we are. And then I correct it now while I still have extra wood there. Okay, so I've got a gap here of close to 1/8 of an inch, and I have no gap there, so that means I'm about 1/8 of an inch thicker over here than I am over here. So I'm going to fix that. First I'll take a little nibble off down here, come back, take more of a nibble, and come back and take one more. And that should have made me pretty close to even. So now I'm going to start taking some very light cuts. Now, before I make my final cut, I've got probably 1/100th of an inch of extra wood there. I'm going to test my wall thickness. Okay, and I'm good. So this area right here is all even. Okay, but it's 1/100th of an inch thicker than it is here. And you can see that line over there, that proves it. Now the difficult part is, since we're doing this in stages, to keep this profile going without any undulations in the surface. Okay, because we're working here, now we've got to continue this so that the profile continues in the same line without going like this and then coming up and going back down again. So in order to do that, that last bead that I left scored, that still has a flat top, that third one right there, the third 1/8 one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the bevel of the tool right on that bead, flat on there. And that's the direction I need to move the tool to continue that profile in a straight line or in the same curve that I have. Okay, so it looks like this. Now very, very light. Again, this is bevel touching, bevel floating, bevel caressing, very, very light cut. Okay, so I got that bevel right on that flat bead. That's the direction I need to go. And you see I'm barely taking off a micron there. I still got a little line, so I'm going to come back one more time. And if your tool is sharp, you could do this. If your tool is not sharp, you can't pick up a cut that small. Okay, so sharpen your tools. Most people do not sharpen enough when they're turning. If you got to push the tool too hard and you can't pick up a minuscule little cut like that, get to the grinder. Okay, so now we're going to finish beading that section. Got to find the beading tool. That's the 1/8. Okay, so we're going to get the height set correctly and then put it back in position. Now I know that it's going to start screaming at me because of the thinness of the wood, so I'm going to be prepared by keeping the paper towel handy because I know I'm going to need it, and it will not make a liar out of me. So I said usually around the 3rd or the 4th bead. Okay, so first I'm going to score. Okay, now I'm going to come back and start cutting them. So remember, I got the handle down low, points to the tool on center. You hear that? I can't cut that bead while it's vibrating like that. So I'm going to back it up. And I'm putting just enough pressure to dampen the vibration. I don't want to burnish the back of the piece with the paper towel and turn everything brown. Okay, now I'll try it without it. Usually that's about where it is. Generally by now I can go and continue beading and I don't need the paper towel anymore. Okay, now that last scored bead, I'll leave that as my next reference point. Now I can get rid of the rest of this in one shot. While I'm back here, I'll get a joke for you. So when I was a little boy growing up in Brooklyn, my father used to play catch with me. And it was a lot of fun until he dropped me. Okay, so I'm going to waste away wood here. I had a friend who was addicted to brake fluid, but he said he could stop any time. No? Now my tool rest is low because I didn't raise it after I was doing the beading before. So I got to raise my tool rest a little bit. Okay, now we can go back and cut it the right way. And if you've got the tool go right across the center, okay, you'll get right across the center without leaving a little nubbin in the middle. So at this point, I'm going to measure my wall thickness. Now I can only measure down up until I hit the chuck. So once the chuck gets in the way, that's as far as I can go. So I can measure here, and I can see I'm about well over 1/8 of an inch difference. So that means I know I'm getting thicker as I go down, so I've got to continue thinning it down. But once I get beyond this area right here, then I just got to eyeball it. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, so right here I'm touching. Right there I'm just under 1/8 now, probably closer to 1/16. So one more shot at it should get everything evened up. Okay, we're close enough here now. We're probably, I'd say, within a 64th, so I can correct that as I'm making the final cuts. Now I'm going to get my tool rest a little closer. Okay, so now I'm going to start getting ready for my final cut. So again, I'm going to put the bevel of the tool flat on that last flat bead that I left so that I know what direction the tool has to go to continue my profile so that I don't have any undulations in the surface. Now I'm going nice and slow, bevel floating, letting the lathe do the work. When you get in the middle here, your surface speed is much slower than it is at the outside. So take your time, don't rush the cut. Go right across the middle so you don't leave a nubbin. Okay, so now I get ready to finish the beading up. So now I don't really see my center mark anymore, but there's a tiny little pip right there. I can still see where it is. So I know how to position the beading tool. That's about it. And get this as close as I can without touching. Okay, so I'll continue scoring lines now. Stop there for now. I'll come back and cut these. Now I might start getting vibrations again, so I may need the paper towel, but we'll see what happens. Yep. Now you always have to clean the tool off so that you can see where you're putting the points. The shavings always want to accumulate on the top of the tool. And then as you're moving it to the next bead, now you see I got all that garbage on the top. I can't see where I'm putting the tool. So you got to clean it off so that you can see what you're doing. Now these tools are very easy to maintain. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. They will stay sharp a long time. And generally, you could do both sides of a large platter with one sharpened tool and not have to stop to sharpen it again. And likewise, for a large hollow vessel like this tall one over here, you can do that entire vessel with one sharpening of the tool. So you start out with a freshly sharpened tool, and you're good to go. Okay, so now I got my last one that I scored. So now I got to score some more. And then when I get to the middle, I have to make my decision, one more bead, yes or no. So my rule of thumb is, if I add another bead and it leaves me with less than a quarter in the middle, then I don't add it. But if I add another bead and I have more than a quarter, somewhere between a quarter and 3/8 it'll always be, then I will add the bead. So what I look at, right, I have about 5/8 of an inch there. So if I add one more bead, I'm going to get more than a quarter of an inch. So I'm going to add the bead, and then we'll see what we have left after that. So now I have 3/8 of an inch left. So if I add another bead, I'm going to be left with 1/8 of an inch, so no more. So now we'll finish cutting these. I don't know, Powermatic blades don't make all this noise. Sorry, Frank. Where'd you go, Frank? Okay, so that's it for the beading. The next thing I do is that little button that's in the middle now has sharp corners. Everything here is all beaded, nice and round, nice and round, nice and round, but that button in the middle has sharp corners, and I don't like that. So I take my little 3/8 detail gouge and I carefully round over that corners of that last little thing in the middle so that it just blends in a little nicer. Okay, then I get my Formica. Here it is. There it was. Huh? I'm good. Okay, so I have a piece of Formica again. This time I'm going to cut it into a point. So I have a sharp point here. And the reason I do that is so that I can start burning these inner ones, and all I can fit in there is the point. I can't get any more than that in there at this time. So now I need speed here, because my surface speed in the middle is very, very slow. So I'm going to take that point, and I'm just going to put it in there and hold it patiently until the black line develops, and there it is. Now that point just got a little flat on it, which fits perfectly into the next one. And now that flat got a little bigger. Now that fits even more perfectly into that one, and so forth. So as you keep working your way up, that little point has got about a 3/8 inch flat spot on it now that continuously fits right in each valley as you go. Now it's almost becoming all the way flat on the top, so I'll turn it around and use it that way. And now that I'm getting into the bigger diameter ones, I can get the entire width of the Formica in there. Now even if this piece was fluttering out here, I could still hold the Formica in there while the piece was fluttering, and I'd still be able to burn the line. But I would not be able to cut a bead. Now I'll slow it down. And then with the piece of Scotch-Brite, I just preemptively or proactively just give it a hit in case I bumped it anywhere. And then we're done with that. So now we've got both sides of the piece beaded. And then before we get ready to do the indexing, what I have to do is turn away most of this tenon here and most of this shoulder so that I can add some more beads to the back. So we'll do that real quick, and then we'll get into the good stuff. So I get my trusty piece of mouse pad out. And because I marked the center, this is an easy job. If I didn't mark the center, I would be cursing. So it should run true, or as true as a one-way would let it run. See, these things, they just don't fit right. I mean, look, you can't get it in there. This doesn't happen on Powermatics. I'm telling you, Frank. I shouldn't do that. I know Frank sells one-ways. He's a dealer. They are good lathes. We kid. Want me to turn that off while you do that?
Something's holding this up. There we go. Okay, now. Okay, now you're good.
Clack, 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 clack. All right, so now I'm going to finish shaping the back. What I'm going to wind up doing is leaving about a 1-inch tenon on there. And the 1-inch tenon that I'm going to leave on there is just so I can hold it to index it. Okay, it's never going to go under power with that little 1-inch tenon. Okay, it's just give me a method to hold it. So a 1-inch tenon means I'm going to get rid of most of what you see here. Somewhere about there, maybe even a little less than that. Okay, now the rest of this I got to finish shaping it, keeping my profile. So because I left that little shoulder there for the chuck, that gives me that little bit of extra wood so that I can continue the profile of the piece all the way to that, what's going to be the flat spot in the center where I'm going to sign my name. So that little bit of extra wood I left there lets me do that without having to worry about losing the profile back there. So all I'm doing now is just keeping the profile consistent. And that looks about right to me. Maybe a little bump there. There we go. Okay, and then I'm just going to form that tenon. Again, this doesn't even have to be a good tenon. Like I said, it's only going to be held by a smaller chuck so that I can index it. Now I got to go back in there and finish beading those. So make sure I get the 1/8 tool, not the 3/16. And then I'm going to put the tool rest in position. Now I can't see the center for judging the height of the tool rest. I mean the height of the beading tool. But I've done this enough times to know how high the tool rest should be. So now I can get, and even with the tailstock in the way, no handle, that lets me get in here. I could extend the quill more to give myself even more room, but it's still, I can work in here. So now I'll continue scoring from that last reference line I had. And that's as many as I can get without making the tenon a little smaller. A little speed here. And the last one. And then to find my little piece of Formica in the dark here. There's one here. There's my scissors. Okay, crank up the speed. And then I can get right in here and burn these guys in. That's that. And then just give it a hit with a Scotch-Brite pad just in case. And now we're done with the turning part. After I do all the indexing and then I do the burning, then I'm going to put it back again just like this with the mouse pad between centers, and I'll get rid of all of the tenon, okay, as much as I can. I'll still have a little tiny nub left in there because I can't get on the live center. And then I'll either cut that away with a knife or I'll sand it off, whichever is fastest. If you got a vacuum chuck, you can put it on a vacuum chuck to do that. But I'm not going to do that in the demo because we won't have time for that. But you just have to understand that after you do the burning, you got to put it back and get rid of the tenon. After you draw all the pencil lines, okay, you don't want to do it with just the pencil lines on here, because if this mouse pad or something slips and then it erases all your pencil lines, okay, then you don't have a way of holding it again to index it again. And you don't want to have to index it twice. So after you index it, get all the pencil lines on, burn both sides of the piece, then put it back on and remove that little, whatever's left of the tenon. Okay, I can take the glove off now. My hand's sweating in there. And then we got to take this chuck off. Got 1 wrench, 2 wrench. We'll switch to a different chuck. You need an index wheel too. So worried about the index wheels. I talked a little bit before about them. So I showed you you can print out your index wheels using that software. And once you print them out, I usually print them out so that they're 8 inches on the paper. Then I cut 8-inch masonite discs, 1/8-inch masonite I use, and I just tape them on. Just tape them around the outside. You can glue them on if you want. But I like to tape them on, and this way, when I need another one, I just tape it right over the top. And I keep taping them over and over and over until I got 15 pieces of paper under here. Then I tear them all off and I print out fresh ones, and I start again. I have a drawer full of these, all different ones. This one has 48 or 96. So if I use just every other line, you know, either the short ones or the long ones, I'd get 48. But if I use all of these lines in here, I would get 96. This side I have set up for 204. This one here is 72 if I use just every other line, or 144 if I use them all. And then underneath it, there's another one here. You can see there's another piece of paper stuck under there. I don't know what it is. Probably 96. This one is good for 60 or 120. This is the same, and here's one that has a 192 on one side. This happens to be a bigger disc, but it's still an 8-inch piece of paper. This is 72, 144. So these are all cut to fit a Powermatic spindle. So I brought one with me that has a slightly larger hole that will fit on the one-way spindle. But since this is a 1 1/4 adapter, I could use any one on there. So I'll find one that fits it a little bit better, like that. And then you put your chuck on top of that. How come this lathe doesn't have a hand wheel? All right, this Vic mark is not going to fit on this adapter, it looks like. There we go. And what you got to make sure is that everything is tight, so that the index wheel and the chuck, everything has to move in unison. If the index wheel can slip behind the chuck, your indexing will go off. So make sure everything is on there and tight so it all moves together. So I've got 72 and 144 looking at me, so I'm going to index this piece to 72. Okay, the next thing we need is a method of indexing. So I make this board up here. So this is just an old board from some kitchen cabinet component, very smooth wood, melamine or whatever they call it. I've been using this thing for close to 5 years now, so you can see how I'm wearing the surface off of it. But what's important is that it's smooth and big enough for whatever you're going to do. This is the actual board that I use at home for every one of these pieces you see here. I have a couple of rare earth magnets embedded in the bottom so that it stays where you put it. And then you just bring it so this stick over here has to be center height of your lathe. So my lathe is a 3520, so this is the stick that I use at home, this one here. So that's 10¼ inches high. But for this lathe, it's a 12-inch center, so I just took another stick and I stuck it along the back of it, and I put 2 screws in to hold it in place. Basically, it's an extension. And then I will take it off tomorrow because we don't need it. Okay, so basically what you're going to do is the top of the stick, you're going to line it up with the index lines. So right here I line it up, and then when I'm ready to go to the next one, I'm going to slide it down to the next long line. Every other line is 72. Then I slide it down to that one, and I slide it down to that one. And there's no need for any clamping or fixing the piece because it's not going to go anywhere. Basically, all you're going to do is line this up with the top. You're going to draw your pencil lines. You're going to move it, draw your pencil lines. There's no need for any kind of clamping here. So we get the piece, and we go into the chuck, and we hold it. Now, there's 2 methods that I use to do the indexing. Both of them require the use of this board. One method is to use this pencil jig. So this has another piece of smooth surface wood on the bottom so that it runs around on here nice and easy. And then it has a stick. And the stick has to have a hole drilled in the stick so that your pencil comes out at dead center on your lathe. Okay? So since I'm on a 3/4 inch board here, this hole has to be 11¼ of there up until where the center of the hole would be. That puts me dead center. Good? So that's one way of doing it. So then what you do is you would line up your index mark to the top of your stick, and then you would draw a line here like that. I don't go all the way to the middle because they would get so close together you can't tell one from the other. And then I would draw the same line on the back, and then I move it to the next index line, and then I would do the same thing again, and I do the same thing again, and I do that 72 times on this particular piece. Another method that I use from time to time, depending on the piece, is this. Now this also is made for my Powermatic, so I had to adjust it so that it would fit this lathe. You build yourself a platform. Now this is perfect for my Powermatic, the way you see it. But for this lathe, I needed to build a platform to put it on so that it's all going to wind up on center height. And then I take a piece of anything, and I cut a slot on it so that it goes around the platter, like that. And then I use a clamp to, it's backwards. This board over here is for clamping, so it has to go this way. Now, I probably didn't show you this in Campbell, because I started doing this recently. So this just keeps this board in place. Then I use 2 pencils. 1, 2. Okay, so I set up my next index line. I don't know which one I did. I did that one already. So now I go to this one. Okay, with 1 pencil in the front, I do that. And another one in the back, I do that. I move it. I do that. I do that. I get all the way up there. And I move it. It's faster. The other advantage of this is it is a bit more accurate. And if you rotate the pencil as you're using it, it stays sharp. But you got to be careful because not every pencil has the lead coming out in the center. I've learned that. I think the Chinese quality of pencils is poor. But what you can do with this to save yourself a little bit of time, maybe, I don't really think it saves any time, but some people think it will, is you could build yourself a sled to hold your burning pen. And instead of drawing pencil lines on here, you can burn while you're indexing it. So you have the sled rides on the wood here just the way the pencil does, and you have your burning pen built into this little sled, and then you can burn, move it, burn. Okay, but it doesn't work well on the back of the piece. But if you had longer chuck jaws or some way of getting the more distance between the wheel and the chuck, you could do it. I don't like doing it that way. I only use it for the inside of a bowl. If I'm indexing inside of a bowl, I will burn the inside of the bowl, but draw the pencil lines on the backside and do that part in my chair. It's hard to burn the lines on the inside of a concave surface. It's just hard to do that. It's no place to rest your hand. So I find that's a little bit easier. Again, if it's a really large bowl, then I just draw pencil lines and I'll sit down in my chair and do it. But like for the insides of those hollow vessels on the table where I did the inside of the piece, that I burned it with the burning pen in a sled. So I would do this 72 times until I come all the way around the piece, and I would be done with indexing. So you basically get to see a little bit of indexing, and that's the way it's done. So I'll put this away, and then we'll get into the good stuff. And this goes in there. Okay, now I could take this out. Have a swig. Got to stay hydrated. We could pass this around if you all want to look at it. We won't be working on that one anymore. Okay, now, through the magic of television, now you're going to have to focus the camera down here. So I asked my wife what she would like for Christmas. She said nothing would make her happier than a diamond ring, so I got her nothing. I told my doctor that I broke my arm in 2 places. He said, well, don't go to those 2 places anymore. That one you like? See, I don't know. I don't think that one's that funny. So I went to the grocery store to do some shopping, and the sign at the cashier said 8 items or less, so I changed my name to Les. All right, so worried about the burning pens now. So now what we're going to do is, through the magic of television, we have a piece that's been completely indexed. It's the same size as the piece that we just did, and this has been indexed to 72 or maybe 96, I think 72 it looks like. So this is what the burning pen looks like. So you can see how it's machined, that it has this cove inside it that matches the D-way bead exactly. So as I said, when I had the guy make these, I beaded up some wood, sent it to him so that he can test fit it over the D-way beading tool. So these tools are custom made for the D-way beads. He makes them in 1/8 and he also makes them in 3/16. That's it. Okay, normally I do this now in my recliner chair. I got my feet up, I got 2 lamps over my shoulders looking down at me, so I got good lighting without glare. So I would be sitting in the chair nice and comfortable doing this, not standing over here hunched over. But I'm just going to do a little bit of this so you can see how it's done. So I'm going to give the pen a moment to heat up here. A little hotter. Usually on this burner, it's somewhere between number 6 and 7 out of 10 for this particular pen is about the right heat. Now I use the Optima wood burners. It's made by the same guy that makes the pen. It doesn't matter what burner you use. I prefer Optima because his pens are made for his burners, but these pens will work with razor tip and Detail Master and Coalwood. Burn Master, those red ones, you got to be a little careful. The Burn Master ones run very hot, so even with the dial turned all the way down to 0, this pen may run too hot. So if your Burn Master has the little hole right near the temperature control, there's a little hole in there that you could put a little 16th inch hex key in there, and you can turn there's a trim pot inside. You could turn it down a notch, then it will heat this pen up successfully. But if you got it all the way down to 0 and the pen is burning way too hot, and your burner doesn't have a trim pot, then this pen's not going to work well on your burner. That's the only exception we found so far for using Optima pens on other burners. They work fine on razor tip, fine on Coalwoods, the Cub Cadets, and of course on the Optimas. Detail Masters, they are out of business, but people still have them. We haven't had any problems on those. The only thing is these burners have a male RCA on the end, so you need a cord with a female RCA. So if you don't have that, I have cords that will fit just about any burner. Okay, so we'll give it a moment to get back heated up. Okay, so basically I've got my pencil lines drawn on here. So then I just, again, sitting in my chair, I would find the line and I would just give the pen a touch on the top of the line. And I don't overburn, so this is not hot enough, so I'm going to come up a little hotter. Give it a moment. So I burned one line here already, so you could see what it should look like. There we go, that's better. So basically, it's just a touch right on the top of the pencil line that you made. And you want to just keep the lines as straight as you possibly can. It doesn't have to be perfect. You know, you just don't want the lines staggering and wavering and drunken all over the place. So you just go as straight as you possibly can. And it takes about a second per touch. And I'm not pushing the pen down hard on the wood. I let it sit right over the bead. And if you cut your beads right, so that your beads are all round and not flat on the top, it really just takes a very light touch of the pen to burn the line. You don't want the lines to be too dark and overburned where it leaves like a brownish stain on the sides of the line. You don't want that. Okay, you don't want the lines thick. Okay, if you're making your own burning pens, some people do that. If you can't make them burn a line as thin as this, then you need to sharpen up that burning tip that you made a little bit more. Now, if you like thick lines, then fine, go right ahead. But I like the lines to be as thin as a pencil line and just dark, not overburned. And if you got a burner that can keep up with you, like this one can, you see how it doesn't have any recovery time. I just keep going. I don't have to wait for the pen to catch up. You just keep on going. This is the most boring part of the job because it's just very tedious. There's no mind working here at all. It's just follow the lines. So, you can listen to the radio while you do this. If you want to watch TV, be careful. Don't fall asleep when you're doing this. Honest truth, I have fallen asleep doing this and burned a hole in my shirt. Fortunately, I didn't burn a hole in the leather arm of the recliner chair. Then my wife wouldn't like that. So don't fall asleep. But you see, this is just mind-numbing, tedious work. And depending on the size of the piece, you're either in it for a couple hours or you're in it for a couple days. A piece like this size here, for me, I'm probably looking at 3 to 4 hours of burning time. That's if I do it in one sitting. I usually don't do it in one sitting. Generally for me, it's an hour and a half, 2 hours tops, and then I get up and do something else. and then I may not pick it up again until tomorrow, but maybe I'll come back to it later in the evening. So generally never more than 2 hours in a sitting. I get cramps in my hand, I got to get up and move around a little bit, and it's not good to be sedentary. We all need to stay in motion. That keeps us healthy. So sitting in the chair all day long doing this is not good for you. Move around. Also, if you don't have patience, this isn't for you, okay? And if you don't have persistence, this isn't for you. And if you don't have good eyesight or the ability to get good eyesight, and if you don't have steady hands, then this is not for you either. Which reminds me of a joke. So I'm not one of those people that uses big words just to make myself sound perspicacious. Okay, so you get the drift, right? So we do that until we finish both sides of the piece. Okay? Once we finish both sides of the piece, so this side is all done, so we're going to do a little coloring on this side, but I would continue doing all of the burning, all of it, before I put any ink on the paper. Once I've got all that burning done, it goes back on here with the mouse pad, and I would turn away this little bit of a tenon here. Okay, then I don't have to worry about accidentally erasing any of my pencil lines if that mouse pad moved or something like that. The next thing I'm going to show you is how I do that weave around the rim. And to do that, I have another sample piece we'll work on. This is done with a medium skew, not a turning skew, a burning skew. So this is a medium skew here. Okay, that's the edge we're going to work with. And I've done various sections of this during different demos, so I'm just going to continue working on another section of it someplace on this piece. So all this requires is a single pencil line right down the center of the piece here. So right here, I draw a pencil line. Okay, that's all it requires for you to work on this. When I first started doing this weave pattern on the rim, I used to try to make little templates out of plastic. I used to use straws, pieces of plastic, index folders and things, and I would bend it around here and draw pencil lines on here, and then try to use that pencil lines as templates to burn the pattern on there. And to do this little piece would take me about 8 hours or so to do that, plus tremendous cramps in my hands. So I finally realized, okay, I know what it's supposed to look like, so just freehand it. So that's what I do. Now, if I were to burn all the way around this, it takes me about an hour. And on a large platter, like a 12, 13-inch platter, it used to take me 10 or 12 hours. It's an hour and a half now. Okay, just because I freehand it. I don't monkey around with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just got to be as good as you can get it. So here we go. Crank up the pen. So this is described in the article in the AAW journal that I talked about earlier. So there's a step-by-step procedure. So it's basically 14, 15 steps to do this. 14 to 15 touches. Actually, 14 touches of the pen, and the 15th step is erasing the pencil line. Am I right? Something like that? Yeah, okay. So once the pen is hot, there we go. So I'm going to start working. I did up to here, so I'll skip a little bit and I'll start another section. So all I'm going to start doing is from the pencil line out towards the front of the piece, I'm going to draw lines or burn lines that are at about 45 degrees, okay, and about 1/8 of an inch apart, give or take. Doesn't have to be exact. So starting here, again, this I would be in the chair. So I burn that line there, and about every 1/8 of an inch, I burn a line from that center line out. Got to make this a little hotter. Okay, so that's step one. I would go all the way around the piece. And then as I come up to where I started, as I get close, I start fudging the spacing so that I don't wind up with two lines that are like right on top of each other. So I just, like the last 3 or 4 lines, I sort of fudge that spacing up. Okay, then on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to start from the middle of each set of lines. So right where these 2 lines here intersect the piece, I'm going to start right in the middle of them, and I'm going to come down at about 45 degrees, and just keep doing that. Now I'm a little more than 1/8 of an inch on this one, but that's okay. It still comes out the same, just different. And I would do that all the way around. Then each one of these lines, I'm going to bring them up to meet the line above it. So this one here is going to come all the way up to meet that one. Now I could have done that all in one step, but I always choose to do it this way. I don't know why. And then the ones that I did in the front, same thing. I'm going to bring each one of these front lines up to meet the one that's up above it. And again, because the pen is just the right heat, I'm not getting overburn or big blotches when the pen touches the wood. Okay, so you see I've started establishing the herringbone there now. The next thing, which is the hardest part, is taking each one of these lines and bringing them over the top. So here you got to come, pick up the line, and you got to bring it over the top. Each one of them's got to come over the top. And one more. That gets them almost there. Then you got to bring them all the way home to the very bottom here. Being careful that you don't bump the back of the first 1/8 of an inch bead, because you leave a little black spot back there. Okay, so that would have been touch number 5. Then on the back, no, that was 6. On the back side, we have to do the same thing here. We got to pick each one of these up and bring them over the back. So coming around the round. Oops, I missed. And then you got to bring them all the way home, so that you come all the way down into there. Again, being careful that you don't bump the back of that last 1/8 inch bead there. So this is touch number 8. Okay, so now you can see we start developing the full weave pattern. The next thing I like to do is to give it the authenticity now, to give it the illusion of a crease as the weave goes under and over each piece, is I put a little tick mark in the middle of each one of these. So this is touch number 9. This gives it the illusion of crease. And then on this side, the same thing. This is touch 10. And if you wanted to, you could put 2 touches in there, or even 3. It's up to you. Okay, that gives it illusion of a crease there. Then down in here, I put a little crease in there, so another little tick in there, or you could put 2. Since these are a little wider apart, I'll do 2. That one I'll do 1. And then down in here, same thing, put 1 or 2. Okay, that would be all the burning part of it. So that was 12 touches, so it was not 14. Then I take an eraser. Now I use these kneadable erasers. So these are made by Faber-Castell or Prismacolor, I think, makes them. And you can knead them into any shape you want. But the beauty of them is they don't leave eraser dust. So then I just erase the pencil line. Okay, so this is the section that we just did here now. And you see we have that appearance of sort of a herringbone type of weave around it. So of course that would go all the way around the piece. The other thing that I like about these kneadable erasers is, so after you have done all of your burning, okay, sometimes you have little stray pencil marks, okay, because maybe you went a little bit off your index lines, either deliberately or by accident. So by using this, just rubbing it along the back of the piece, you can erase all of your extraneous pencil lines, and you see how this sort of conforms itself to the beads. The harder you push, the more it conforms itself to the beads. So it actually can erase right down into the bottom of each bead. And these things, they cost about $2, but I've been using this one for a couple years, and I would have been using the first one that I had today if I didn't lose it. So I really like using those. Okay, so now we get on to the last thing, which is actually coloring in the pattern. Okay, and then we had our pattern out here. So this is the pattern that we're working on, and this is our piece of wood. So I like to use these India ink markers. Now, other people use Sharpies. Don't use those. Prismacolor, Copic markers, Tombows some people use. Those are all alcohol-based alcohol dyes. These are India ink. The difference is alcohol dyes are permanent, so are these. Alcohol dyes are not light fast. These are. Alcohol dyes penetrates deeply into the wood and tends to bleed. This India ink does not. It does not go deeply into the wood, and it will not bleed on you. So it'll never go beyond your burn line. Now, the burn line sort of cauterize the cells of the wood. So even with the alcohol dyes won't bleed, but if you hold it there too long, it will. But these pens will never bleed beyond your burn lines. So that's why I like them. So because they don't penetrate as deeply as the alcohol dyes, if you make a mistake with alcohol dye, you live with it. If you make a mistake with this, you can remove it, you can shave it off with a scalpel. And I will show you how to do that. So when I first started using this, there were only 3 colors available to me that came with the right size tips and nibs that I need to do this work. Now, Faber-Castell makes about 60 or so different colors of these, but most of them only come with what they call the brush tip. So the brush tip is this one here. Okay, so the entire tip is some kind of fibrous felt, so you can work using that entire tip. But because it's unprotected, you can't get down to the valleys with it without bumping into the adjacent beads. So they make another pen that has this superfine nib on it that's protected by the metal sleeve. So with that pen, you can get right down to the valleys and square off all your corners and get your little detail work done. So for each color pen you're going to work with, you need 2 pens, the brush tip and the superfine one. So there were only these 3 colors were the only colors that they made that came with the superfine tip. It was black, brown, which they call sepia, and this rustic red color, which they call sanguine, which is fine if you're doing Native American work, because those were the colors that they used on Native American baskets, because those are the dyes that they had available to them. So fine. But you get tired of working with those same 3 colors over and over again. So finally, for whatever reason, they added 8 more colors into the palette. So there's a red, and there's this bluish purple color, and there's a handful of others here. So there's a blue and a turquoise, an orange, and this burgundy or magenta color, and there's also a green. And they also make a pinkish purple color, which I don't buy because I don't use it. So there are 11 colors that you could use now instead of just the 3. So you have 11 colors with the right size tips that you could use. I use a scalpel, as I said before, if I make a mistake. So this is a number 11 scalpel blade in a typical number 3 scalpel handle. I buy these on eBay. They sell them for veterinary use only, whatever that means. So it means you can do surgery on your pets, but not on your family, I guess, right? So if you make a mistake with the scalpel, you can shave it away. And I'll show you that when I make a mistake. Okay, so to do this, the very first thing I do before I start coloring anywhere on the piece, and I don't know if you could see it on the camera, but you see all these little dots that I made on here. Can you see these little dots? Yes. Okay, so what I do is, following my pattern, I put a dot using the color of the ink that I'm going to use in the square that needs to be colored. This way, I don't accidentally color a square that's supposed to remain natural. So as I'm going through doing the coloring, if there's no dot, then no ink. If there's a dot, then color it in with whatever color the dot is. Makes it simple. So I would do all of the dots on the piece before I color anything in. So here you see I've got all these dots here, and then these lines here are all with the red color. Then all these dots here, and then this line with the red color. If you look at my pattern, you see all this area here is black, and then you got the red line. And then all these areas are black, and then you got the red line. So basically that's what I've done here, is I put the little dots in every box that's going to be colored. If I accidentally put a dot where I shouldn't have put the dot, okay, I would take my scalpel and just lay it on the side. Let's just say this dot here was in the wrong place right here. I can just shave it right off, and you see that dot now is gone. And I barely removed any wood. Okay, I did not destroy the profile of the bead at all because I lifted it off with a nice shaving. Now that dot belonged there, so I'm going to put it back. Now if I colored in an entire box wrong, okay, you can shave it all away, but you don't want to have to do that too often, trust me. It takes up a lot of time. If you used alcohol dye and you put ink where it didn't belong, you would have to carve it out to get rid of it, and it won't look good. So that's another reason, like I said, I don't like alcohol dyes. So now I start coloring. So again, I'm in my reclining chair with feet up, and I'm comfortable, good lighting. So I start with the brush tip pen, and I always work with the black or the darkest color first. And then if there's a second color in the piece, I do that color afterwards. I never do pieces with more than 2 colors. Occasionally, I put a third color in, but it's just a highlight here and there. It has very, very little bit of the third color. But rarely do I use more than 2. So I'll pick a section to start. I'll start right here. So with the brush tip marker, I'm going to color in as much of it as I can, because this lays the ink down quickly. And I get as close to the valley as my nerves will let me go. And as close to the burn line as my nerves will let me go. And this brush tip pen lays the ink down very quickly, so you cover a lot with just one swipe of the pen. And like here where I'm doing 3 boxes, and now 5 boxes, and now 3 boxes, so you get 3 for the price of 1, 5 for the price of 1. But when you're doing just 1 box, you got to be careful on all 4 sides of it. So once I've done that side of the bead, then I flip it around the other way so I can get the other side of the bead. Again, going as close to the valley as my nerves will let me go. Now when I'm here, if I hit the valley and I bump the other bead here, that's all fine because it's all black. Okay, but if I was going up against the bead that shouldn't be colored, like right here, I got to be real careful when I get down to the valley because I don't want to bump that bead that should not be colored. Now when I do this at home, this part is done in complete concentration. I don't watch TV, I don't listen to the radio. I'm focused completely on what I'm doing. Now sometimes my son will be in the basement watching big TV and I'm sitting in my chair working on these, but I completely tune out his Xbox or whatever he's doing. So what I would do is I would do this that work that I just did here, I would do that all the way around the piece. So all of the brush tip work that needs to be done, I do that all the way around the piece. Once I'm done with that, then I come up and I pick up my superfine nib, and then I use that to get down to the valleys and to get right to the burn lines and to square off all my corners, to get the ink as far down to the valley as the pen will possibly go. And that metal sleeve on there prevents the ink from bleeding out and hitting the adjacent bead. If I accidentally go beyond the burn line, I will shave it off with the scalpel. Most people don't do that, but I am anal about this.
Is it best to do it immediately?
What's that?
Is it best to scrape it?
No, you could do. I usually come back and do them all later. I don't bother with it right away. When I'm done, if I make mistakes, I could come back and clean them up later. The ink dries very quickly. I mean, you know, usually as soon as you're done, it's smudge proof. Okay, so I do all of one side of the bead, and I work my way all the way around, and I do that same side of the bead all the way around, and then I come and get the other side and go all the way around the piece doing the same thing, making sure I get down to the valley, to the burn lines, square off the corners, no white spots showing where there shouldn't be any white spots. This is the best part of the project to me, because this is where you see your two-dimensional pattern here come to life on the curved surface. Sometimes when you design a pattern, not so much for the polograph ones that you do on platters, but when you design a pattern on the regular graph paper for a vessel, sometimes what you see in two-dimensional on there, when it goes on the vessel, looks terrible. So I've had a few pieces where I've done them, and what I thought looked great on paper looked horrible on the vessel. So they never see the light of day. So after I do all of the black, then I switch to the other color. So now I'm going to do one of these spokes here. So this is a vertical line, so I got to go from this bead all the way down to the bottom using this color. So I just go right up until the burn line as close as I can without going over it. And again, here I'm getting a whole bunch of them for the price of one, because I really don't have to be too careful where each bead is adjacent to each other bead, because they're all the same color. And as I said before, if you get good beads where they're smooth, these pens will last you a long, long time. But if your beads are rough and abrasive, you're going to wear out the tips of the pens pretty quickly. Now with this particular pen, the ones with the brush tip, you see it's got a nice sharp point on it. When that wears out, which it will do even with good beads, it does start to get abraded a bit, and it starts to get round and not as sharp, and you can't get as accurate. So what they don't tell you is you can take a pair of pliers or tweezers and you can pull this out of there, and on the other side you've got a nice fresh sharp point waiting for you. Turn it around. But of course they don't tell you that, because then you only buy half the amount of pens. But only works on the brush tip. On the one with the super fine nib, that doesn't work. I will guarantee you that you will wear out both of the nibs before you run out of ink. So you're generally going to be throwing pens away that are still half full of ink, but that's the cost of it for $3 a pen, so no big deal. Then with the brush tip pen, I get each one of these squared off, get down to the valleys, and finish them off. Almost there. And then the other side of them. And then I would do, of course, all of those red ones the same way. Then what I would do after I finished all the coloring is then I go back with the scalpel. I don't need these on anymore. And I would clean up anything that I made a mistake. Any place where maybe I went over a line or something like that, I would take the scalpel. So like right here, I can see that I got a little tiny spot that I went over. So I would just get rid of that with the scalpel, just shave it away. And again, some people won't bother doing that, but I'm kind of nuts about it. I like to have the precision. So that's I call that my quality control. And then of course, if I spot any place where maybe I didn't get the ink all the way down into a corner, I would pick up the pen and I would fix that at the same time. So I do all that called quality control. Once I'm done with all of that, and now I've done it, all my burning's done, my rim is done, all the ink is on the piece, then I would take it outside and I would give it 5 mists with this Krylon acrylic matte finish. It's number 1311. I buy it at Walmart. It's the cheapest I could find. It's about half the price of like Michael's or Hobby Lobby or Home Depot or anywhere else. It's usually less than $4 a can at Walmart. This is very fast drying, but don't do it indoors because it's, it'll stink up your house. So what I do is I'll take it outside, put it down someplace. If it's platter, flat like this. If it's a vessel, of course, it's standing up like that. And it's 5 really light coats. It's not 5 put on hairspray coats. Okay, so it's not that, okay? And then give it 30 seconds to dry. It dries very, very quickly, okay? And do it again at a different angle, okay? Give it another 30 seconds, do it again. 5 coats. Then turn it around, 5 coats, 5 coats, 5 coats, same way. Okay, that fixes the colors and seals the wood, and then basically you're done with the exception of signing your name. So the last thing you have to do is sign your name on the bottom of the piece. So the way I like to sign my name is, now I've sprayed the piece with the matte spray. That doesn't seal the grain enough for what I'm going to do to it now. So what I do is I take some shellac and I dip a Q-tip in shellac and I coat this little area down here where I'm going to sign my name with some shellac to seal that grain. And I do it maybe 2 or 3 coats of shellac on there. Then I use the Dremel engraving tool on the lowest possible setting, and I sign my name as small as I possibly can with the Dremel tool. Then I take a Q-tip and I dip it in some Kiwi or Griffin black shoe polish, and I rub shoe polish into the engraving, and then I wipe away the excess. Okay, so the shoe polish stays in the engraving and makes my signature permanent that way. So if somebody wants to take my name off and put their name on, then they've got to sand below the engraving to do that. Can't stop that, but it makes it a little harder for somebody to do that. But I just think it's a more quality signature to do it that way. If you didn't seal the grain really well enough and some of the shoe polish embeds itself into the pores of the wood, don't panic. Just dip corner of a paper towel into a little bit of acetone and just wipe it off, and it'll suck it right out of the pores, but it won't mess up your signature. So it just cleans it right out of there. So once you've got that done, then you're done. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. This is the way I do it. Thank you. Before you do that, though, you have to do it again, because now I have to say any questions. And then if there's no questions, then you can applaud. Any questions? Yes, yes, yes. Oh, yeah, how will you sharpen the beading tool? Thank you. So I always forget something. So to sharpen the beading tool is very, very simple. Thank you, Frank. There's several ways you can do it. I prefer using a diamond hone. And you just take the diamond hone and you're going to place it flat on that bevel there. I don't know if you could see that. Okay? And then you're going to give it 4 or 5 swipes in one direction. I usually just go that way. Okay? 4 or 5 swipes, keeping it flat on there. Don't go back and forth, or you tend to round over these points. I find it easier to use one of those credit card size ones. I think I brought one with me here. Yeah, here it is. So this is a CBN hone that you can get from Kenny Rizzer. And then what you do is just put that down on the table. I find this is easy to control it. Put the tool flat on there like that, and then just pull it towards you 3 or 4 times. And what that does now is that has honed the points of the tool and the heel of the tool. Points are all you're concerned with. You can keep doing that forever and ever and ever. You never ever need to go to the grinder with it. But once you lose the hollow grind, it takes longer and longer each time you do this to hone the tool because you're honing more and more surface as it gets flat. So if you wanted to go to the grinder and reestablish the hollow grind, then what I would do is I would go up to my grinder on my finest wheel that I have a 350 CBN wheel on one side of the grinder. I spin the grinder up to full speed, and then I turn it off. I put this on the rest, and I bring it right up flat against the wheel, and I hold it there steady while the wheel spins down on it. Okay, by doing that, you only lose a micron of steel, but you reestablish your hollow grind pretty quickly that way, and the tool is ready for another whole bunch of honings, and the tool will literally last you for eternity if you treat it that way. If you're going to go to the grinder every time it needs to be sharpened, you're going to keep wasting the tool away. Okay, so the tools, what you see here, I mean, this is maybe 1/8 of an inch shorter than it was when I first got it, but I've been using this tool for several years, okay, and I use it, you know, almost every day. So it will literally last you forever. It's M42 steel. It stays sharp an incredibly long time. They're excellent quality steel. Any other questions? Okay, we're done. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to AdvantageLumber.com's live turning demonstration. Tune in every 3rd Wednesday of the month for a new episode. Please click on the link below to see our ever-changing list of turning species. See you next time.